Welcome to the Modeling Uncertainty section of this BeyondFormulas Excel modeling training series. In this lesson, we're going to use data tables to instantly get the answers to all of your scenarios all at once. The goals of this lesson are to understand how to use data tables to calculate all of your important outputs across all scenarios in one go, and to understand the limitations of data tables and the importance of auditing and checking your work. You'll need the CarryMac Case 7.3 Scenarios Data Tables Starter file. By the end of this video, you will have learned how to extend your scenario machine by using data tables to simultaneously calculate the most important outputs for all of your scenarios at once, and you would have learned another important quality lesson along the way. We've already learned how to use data tables to do very impressive things with general forecasting and optimization, as we'd previously used it to extend our basic supply chain model into becoming a fully fledged logistics optimization model. We did this by inputting arbitrary text values, which also happen to be our scenario names, into discrete driver cells driven by data tables. And putting those things together, we were able to calculate advanced things, such as the optimal way to construct a manufacturing supply chain footprint to service all of the US as the volume and geographic rollout changes. But we can also use it for much simpler outputs by combining it with the scenario approach we learned in the previous lesson. Let's start with the outputs we'd like to measure across the various scenarios. Going back to our multi-period P&L, these may be the NPV, which shows us if this investment is any good, some aspect of the total revenue, and the overall number of orders. And so the next step is to summarize these most important outputs and link them in your control panel sheet. We've already created an area in the Assumptions and Output page to do this. Let's open Excel now and demonstrate this. Open the 7.3 Scenarios Data Table Starter file and go to the Assumptions and Output tab. Where we left off the previous lesson, we pulled all of the most important variable drivers from the rest of our model into this Assumptions and Output variables dashboard and configured it so that all of the input parameters in the rest of the model point back at this single driver sheet. We can now combine this with our data table approach learned previously to do some powerful things. For starters though, let's go and summarize the most important outputs from our model. I've already defined a starting point for you on the top right hand side, and hypothesized that the most important outputs would be revenue, number of orders, and overall NPV. So let's click into cell N4, hit equals, and type sum, and then let's go to our P&L page where we'd like to find our total revenue in row 14 and add up all revenue in year 5. Let's close brackets to complete the sum, and then divide by 1 million, which I've entered here in scientific notation, to present the first of our summary metrics. For orders, let's do the same thing again. Equals, sum, P&L page, scroll down to our orders row in row 26 and select all periods in year 5. Close brackets and divide by 1 million or 1E6 and hit enter to complete. And finally, let's pull in our NPV from our overall P&L summary. Hit equals in cell N6, click on the P&L and scroll up to the top to find the NPV in cell H8, and once again divide by 1E6. So now that we have our summary values, we can go ahead and define our next data table. Scroll down to below the scenario dashboard, where I've already set up a template for you. Remember the format of a multi-output one-dimensional data table. On the left-hand side, we have all values that we'd like to substitute into our driver cell, which in this case is D10. And in the columns above, we need to link this to the outputs we'd like to show. So we'll link cell G60 to cell N6, we'll link H60 to N5, and we'll link I60 to N4. Now that we're ready for our data table, we can select the entire range, hit Data, What If Analysis, and Data Table, and then we want to take all values in the column and therefore put them into the column input cell in D10. Hit OK to complete, and make sure you hit F9 to calculate the data table values, and then wait for Excel to complete the calculation. Since the model complexity has grown pretty considerably over the duration of this lesson, this may take a little while. You've just learned and implemented an incredibly useful technique by summarizing a whole set of input assumptions and blending them together in scenarios. As we have done, we can easily combine them or even combine them with multiple axes of scenarios and use data tables to evaluate all of the results we may be interested in across all scenarios. For this particular model, however, there's a tiny issue. The limitations of data tables is that you can't base the output of a data table on the output of another data table, since Excel doesn't know how to calculate the results of a data table and then apply them to a different data table each time. Therefore, if ever your scenario model depends upon underlying data tables or pivot tables, this technique will not work. I wanted to demonstrate it for you because in 90% of the models you build, you won't have this underlying dependency, and this result will actually give you something incredibly useful. This also teaches us about the value of checking your work. In this case, we would have expected the number of orders and the annual revenue to vary slightly from scenario to scenario, since the underlying assumptions actually included different rollout curves for each of the scenarios, which would have resulted in different overall economics. Since the values have all come back equal, this proves to us that Excel is not correctly calculating the output of the data table upon data table. I hope that you can see the unrivaled power that data tables bring to your model, to use a single, simple set of model logic, and then layer on multiple dimensions to calculate simultaneous results. And as mentioned previously, always be careful to go and check your answers.